All right, so thanks everyone for coming. Uh, I'm Justin, and I'm here to talk to you a bit about game design. So I hope you guys enjoy it. I'm gonna cram a lot of information in here, but don't worry if you aren't able to follow it all. This thing's being recorded, and also I have a transcript version that I've put up on my blog that I'll share with you guys afterwards. So you want to be a game designer? Uh, let's say, for the sake of argument, that you're interested in becoming a game designer. So if that's the case, what is this talk going to do that might help you? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to crush your dreams, obviously. Okay, so not really, but I am hoping I might dispel a few myths about game designers. I know that a lot of people, for a lot of you, game design seems like it could be a dream job, and it absolutely can be. But the key word there is job. It is still a profession that does have work, responsibilities, and challenges. And I know that might sound obvious, but you'd be surprised the number of people who go into game design thinking, this is going to be a breeze and I won't have to do any real work. And then you realize very quickly that that's not the case. I remember back when I was at school, there were a lot of people who dropped out in the first year just because they realized that, hey, this is real work and it's actually quite difficult. So what I kind of want to do today is talk a bit about the realities of game design as a profession, so that you can kind of see if it's something you'd actually be interested in, and if so, kind of where to go from there. So this is stuff that I didn't learn from a classroom. It's all kind of things that I picked up along the way. And looking back at it, it's the kind of stuff that I really wish I did know when I first started out. So hopefully you guys find it useful. So I'll be covering some pretty broad topics. I tried to keep this very general because I don't want to get into the nitty gritty too much with you guys, so I will touch on some of it. So I'm going to talk a bit about what a game designer is, what it is that we do, what are the different types of game designers, because yes, there is more than one. A little bit about what the game design process is, and then just a few things you might not know about what we do and maybe a few suggestions to get you on your way. So before we dive right into things, you might be wondering, who even is this guy and why should I listen to him? So, hi, my name's Justin. I'm a game designer. I studied interactive multimedia and design at Carleton University and Algonquin College in Ottawa. That's a course that covers a whole bunch of digital media stuff. So that's like games, web, film, animation, pretty much anything that involves making something that goes on a screen, I've probably done. Later on, I also did a DES, that's a Diploma of Advanced Studies in Game Design at the University of Montreal. I just saw the comment. Thank you. I'm flattered. So that's education, but as far as the actual meat stuff, the professional experience, so after I got out of school, I spent about 5 years in the indie game scene, and I worked on a bunch of games that you've never heard of. And that's not me trying to get hipster cred, by the way. Sadly, it's because most of those projects died before they ever came out. So funny thing about indie is that for every success you see, like Minecraft or Cuphead, there are thousands of games that don't succeed or just never even see the light of day. So the one logo that I could find out of all the companies that I work for is Fortune Interactive, which I think is the only studio that got far enough to have its own social media presence. And unfortunately, their game never actually got released either. So all the work I did with them never came out. So makes it very hard to put on your portfolio when you say, "Oh yeah, I've worked for 5 years, but I can't show you anything." So pro tip: if you're looking to get into indie, be aware that that's a challenge that you'll have to face. But afterwards, I did break into the big leagues of mobile games. So I started off doing some testing work, mostly testing levels for King games. So that's Candy Crush and Blossom Blast mainly. Then I was hired full-time at Gameloft. First, I was a technical game designer, and then later on I became a game economy and systems designer. Yep, Candy Crush Jelly, that's the one. I also did a bit of soda beforehand, but testing, Yeah, it's it was cool, but it was also a lot of tedious work. You play a lot of levels for a lot of time, and then you record every single time you complete a level what your score was. It's if you're wondering, that's what testing's like. I don't touch on it in this presentation, but I may as well mention. Uh, so yeah, GameLoft, I was with them for about 3 years until late last year, back in August, when I switched over to Ubisoft. So now I'm working on AAA. I started off with Hyperscape, which, as you may or may not know, it came out, and frankly, it's kind of fizzled out a bit now. But yeah, it's still up. Oh, cool! At least one person plays it. That's nice. But now I moved off of that game, and I'm on a little, slightly more obscure game that you might not have heard of, called Rainbow Six Siege. Um, frankly, I really like to brag about the fact that I work on that game now. It's the first time that I could actually say a title and people recognize it. It's pretty awesome, not gonna lie. And as a game designer, that's really kind of the dream, is to be able to say, oh yeah, I work on a game that people actually know. So yeah, that's where I'm at now. But yeah, effectively, over the course of all of these, I've worked in indie, mobile, and AAA, which is kind of the trifecta of the different domains of the industry. Uh, and then also on the side, I've done a ton of game jams and also some tabletop gaming, so mostly D&D, or specifically Pathfinder in my case. I don't get paid for any of that, but I like to think the experience still counts. So hopefully all of that was enough to kind of convince you that, yeah, I might know a little bit of what I'm talking about, at least enough to do this talk. So let's start with the first big question. What is a game designer? Now, you might have heard or even thought some of these lines before. I've certainly heard variants of all of them, sometimes even from my coworkers in the industry. And all of these are, of course, wrong. Kinda. Like with everything, it's complicated. So I'll try and break them all down a bit. So the first one here, yes, designers do come up with ideas, but they're far from the only person on the team that does that, and it's also far from the only thing they do. It's kind of like saying a student is the homework guy. There's a bit more to being a student than just doing homework, even if I'm sure it sometimes really does feel like that. Next, the creative director comment. So you probably haven't heard that sentence the way it's written there, but maybe at some point you've thought something like, I want to be the next Hideo Kojima or the next Sid Meier or Shigeru Miyamoto, and I want to make my own franchise. So it's a super common aspiration for game designers to think like, I'm going to be the next Metal Gear Solid guy, or the guy who made Super Mario, and have that kind of reputation. I definitely have felt that in the past, and actually it's a shame I'm not at home, because then I could point behind me and you'd see the giant Metal Gear Solid poster I have back there. But yeah, it's a very common kind of attitude to have when you want to get into games, of eventually the dream is to kind of reach that. But the reality is creative directors definitely can be a big influence on a game, but saying it's their creation really oversimplifies things. Games are rarely a one-person project. There's like maybe a few handfuls of exceptions out there. And in reality, like a game director is more like a navigator. So they determine a direction of where they want the project to go. And then they try to make sure that everyone works towards going in that direction. But they usually aren't the one that figures out the how. And that's a huge part of what makes games what they are. So behind every great creative director, there's usually an equally great, if not greater, team backing them up. That's why, for example, when Hideo Kojima left Konami and went to make his own studio, he brought a lot of people with him. And frankly, if he didn't do that, it would be a very different experience, whatever he created next. So based on what I just said, surely that last point is true, that game designers are the people who tell everyone else what to do. Well, I'd like to say that that's true. I'd definitely love to be able to just decide things and have everyone follow my commands, but Yeah, sadly, life's not that easy. Sooner or later, some programmer or artist or director is going to come around and slap you with the cold hard fish of reality, and that thing stings. Yeah, very often what it ends up being is game design ends up being more like a negotiation. So on the one side, you need to talk to the technical people, like the programmers and artists, to kind of figure out if the idea that you have can actually be made and what it'll take to make work. And then on the other side, you need to talk to the producers, directors, and the higher ups and convince them that the ideas you have are actually worth trying to make work. Um, and unless you can succeed at balancing both of those and getting both of them to say, both sides to say yes, you're going to end up having to go back to the drawing board. And that happens a lot more often than you surely want it to, which is to say ever. And I've certainly had my fair share of instances where I had a cool idea and it looked like everything was going well, and then someone somewhere just kind of nope, and boom, we have to go right back to the beginning. Yeah, that's very true. Having those expectations early, I think for me personally, I found that was a big reason for why I was able to get a lot further than some of my peers because it can be very hard to learn these things the first time around. It can be very rough. So that's kind of a big point of this presentation is me trying to prepare you guys for those surprises that you end up having. So, all right, all of those reality checks in what actually is a game designer. So they're a miserable little pile of solutions. And boy, I hope some of you get that reference because it is old even by my standards. But basically, what I mean is, at our core, we game designers are problem solvers. Our job is to find or take a problem, figure out the best possible solution that everyone on the team can agree on, and then help everyone to understand, build, and promote that solution. So, for the record, when I say problem, that can cover a wide variety of things. It's not just, for example, a problem can be a game, it can be a feature. So to give you some more specific examples, I want a class-based competitive first-person shooter that is unique from other games in this category. That would be a problem. So would I want the movement in this game to be more fun? Or I want a feature that will make people want to spend more money in the game. These would all be problems that a game designer might be tasked with solving. So another comparison that I like to use that I find really helps, especially with people who have like no idea as to what game development is at all, is I like to say a game designer is kind of like an architect. So they don't really decide where the building will be or what it will be used for, and they don't build or paint it themselves. Their job is to write up the plans everyone else is going to follow, and then kind of make sure that whatever they drew isn't going to collapse. So that's more or less what a game designer ends up doing, but instead of making a building, you're making a game. So you might have noticed that my definition of a game designer is really vague. Uh, there's a lot of ways to solve a problem after all. It's kind of like calling someone an adventurer. So if you've played an RPG or watched an anime in the last 5 years, you probably know that there's no universal rule for what an adventurer is or what they can do. So rogues, wizards, fighters, those can all be types of adventurers, but you'd hardly say they're the same thing. So if you played these type of games, you also probably know that it's usually better to pick one or two classes and stick with them, rather than dip a tiny bit into 20 different classes. The same is true for game designers. So actually, I'm going to talk about specializations, and yeah, pro tip, you don't want to be a generalist. So there are many different specializations in game design, each of which kind of focuses on a different aspect of the game. So for you guys, probably most of you, it'll probably be a good while before you really need to think about this. But it's not a bad idea to kind of keep it in the back of your mind as you build up your skills, because this can really help you going forward to kind of build up a unique edge when you're trying to get into the industry afterwards. I remember a lot of people back when I did my bachelor's came out of school and we all kind of had that label of, okay, I'm a game designer. But The unfortunate truth is that in the industry, game designers have a much harder time getting a job. At least in the bigger studios, they're kind of iffy about hiring people out of school. And then if you're just a generalist, the tricky thing there is, okay, you have generalist things. What sets you apart from everyone else? And that's usually where the specializations come in, because in a big studio, you need people to work on very specific things. And for that, you need someone with a more focused approach. So I'm actually a good example of this. When I first came out of school, I had a lot of trouble getting a job as a game designer. And then I ended up doing one tiny change, and literally within a couple months, I got my first offer from Gameloft. And that change was just me swapping my portfolio title from game designer to technical game designer. Crazy thing is, that's literally all I changed. I didn't change my skill list. I didn't change anything else in my resume. I just changed that title. And that was kind of enough to get me noticed, because it made them realize, oh, the things that are in here are kind of different. It was basically highlighting the one thing that I had that a lot of other people that came out of school didn't, which is that I had relatively decent programming ability. Yeah, it helps you stand out a lot to just have that little bit of difference. It's a lot of studios will look for keywords, and that's kind of the thing that you need to get good at the keyword game. But a big part of that, before you can really get into the keywords, is kind of figuring out which things you do want to specialize in. So that's where the specializations come in. So I've tried to break them down a bit here for you guys, but do bear in mind that this isn't a complete list, and it's also not universal. A lot of studios use different names for these roles, or there'll be hybrid roles that are a mix of these. There really aren't any standards in the industry as far as they go. That's because the industry loves to just frustrate you and themselves. The idea of having standards, just don't. We don't do that here. But these are the ones that I kind of see used more often. So usually it's a good idea to kind of give you a baseline for what these are. So let's dive into them one by one. Gameplay designer. This is probably what most of you think about when you're thinking about a game designer. They're the people who come up with the rules for how a game is played. So that's stuff like win and lose conditions, the gameplay mechanics and inputs, stuff like that. So their focus is on what's called the action phase of a game, which all that means is it's the part of the game where the action happens. Which, if you've played any game, you can pretty much identify that. It's the part where either the combat happens, or it's the part where you actually have to use your buttons quickly and make smart decisions, as opposed to like the menus or the free roam parts. Those parts are handled more, well, not entirely, but by the systems designer. So systems designers are a little more obscure than gameplay designers, but they're also pretty much essential to how a game works. So like gameplay designers, they also define the rules of a game, but their focus is kind of on how everything goes together. So for example, in an RPG, a gameplay designer might handle the combat, but a systems designer would be figuring stuff out like the leveling, the items, and how those things kind of link together. So I like to say the systems designer is kind of like a big picture designer. They look at how all the gears fit to make the engine run. And I was a systems designer at Gameloft, and also I had to do a lot of this stuff just for game jams and stuff. So these whiteboards are actually snapshots of what kind of stuff I was doing as a systems designer. So you start seeing like all these charts and crazy flows between points. One thing you learn quickly as a systems designer is that stuff gets really, really messy before it starts making sense. You basically end up with this big knotted ball, and you kind of have to take your time unknotting everything to figure out how everything should connect. That's most of what a systems designer's job ends up being. So the next is the 3C designer. So for those of you that don't know, 3Cs stands for character, controls, and camera. So basically a 3C designer are the ones that handle the player character and how they move and interact with the world. Um, they don't often get as much recognition as other designers, and it's also a very specialized field. But their impact is critical to making a game feel good, which is a lot harder than it sounds. So 3Cs is why parkour in games like Assassin's Creed or Mirror's Edge feel completely different from each other. Uh, it's also why you would never compare games like Doom and Call of Duty, even though technically they're both FPSs. Level designers. These are probably one of the more famous ones just because they're easily one of the most visual. So if you've played games, you probably know what a level is. And if you know that, you probably have a good idea as to what a level designer does. They're the ones that figure out the layout of the maps, what will be inside of them. These designers tend to be more artistic or visually minded. So they'll usually work pretty closely with the art team. But they also need a very good sense of space and pacing to go along with that aesthetic angle. So like you can make something look pretty, but a level designer needs to make it look pretty and functional. Technical designers, TGDs, which I think they have different names in some places, but I've always seen them referred to as technical game designers myself. They're kind of like a bridge between designers and programmers. So if you remember when I say I got hired as a TGD, and that was because I knew how to do programming. So they're usually responsible for back-end stuff, so things like creating tools for other designers, or figuring out how the game's data is managed, which, yeah, is not a super visual job, but it's quite important. So for these people, having a good understanding of either programming or database management, very useful for this type of design. It's also one of the easier designer roles to get as an entry-level position, just because quite often it'll involve a lot of grunt work, and quite frankly isn't very creative or glamorous. So for example, if you played a game with a lot of different items, like thinking off the top of my head, if you played Skyrim and you see like all those armors, all those different items that you can get, and all of them have those unique stats, basically in the background there was a TGD who is responsible for listing all of that out in a table that is then getting read by the game. So there's a lot of data input. It gets long. But despite its kind of reputation as being the sort of jobber designer, technical game designers are super important to a game. Like if you don't have them there, that stuff just doesn't get done, and if that doesn't get done, you lack a lot of critical parts of the game. Also, as far as a job goes, it's actually not too bad to start off with because you learn a lot about how games are made just by seeing how all the data is structured in the background. It's a good pathway to getting into system design, or at least I found when I went through that path. Also, if ever you see a table that looks like this one I have in the background here, that person probably needs to be put on a fire. Please never. Please use tables. Please format your data. I say this as a TGD for the future of the industry, because I have seen too many tables that look like this, and it hurts my soul. So moving on. Game economy designers. They're the people who deal with numbers and balancing. So basically, if it involves calculating numbers, they deal with it. That's stuff like scoring, damage, health, how often you get resources. Yeah, anything with a number, that's usually the game economy designer's wheelhouse. If you happen to be a fan of resource management games, or you're just really into making spreadsheets, then this role might just be for you. I'm a weirdo who really likes making tables in Excel, so I actually got into this relatively easily. But yeah, it's not for everyone, I'll admit. It can definitely be tough and tedious. But also, fun fact, if you're looking for job security in the future, game economy designers are one of the ones that are in the highest demand, generally speaking, because it's specialized and it's also very critical to a lot of games, especially in the industry these days. So yeah, it comes up a lot. So the GED role often ends up getting merged with systems design. So that was the case at Gameloft because, quite frankly, in a lot of games, they kind of come together. Managing numbers and managing how everything goes together, they go hand in hand. Uh, but in bigger studios, they'll often have their own specialization. So like at Gameloft, they were the same, but at Ubisoft, I'm a systems designer and I work with a game economy designer, and we both kind of have our own domains that we specifically look at. Also, in some places, GED can be a bit confusing because it doesn't always refer to kind of the numbers person. It can also refer to the monetization side of things. So at those studios, their responsibilities shift a bit more into subjects like when and where to try and sell you stuff, how much stuff you get for your money. So basically, they're the people who kind of figure out how to handle things like battle passes and loot boxes, which I know some of you might already hate that job title for that. But I tell you that they're in the difficult position that they need to make sure that the game makes a profit. And if they don't succeed, the game will probably get killed. So they really need to manage that. So it's a very unenviable task of figuring out how to design a feature that makes enough money to keep the higher ups happy, while also keeping it balanced and fun. And yeah, depending on the studio and what the mandates are, that can be tricky. And finally, we have narrative designers. So their role is a little more complex than just writing the story. Rather, they have to come up with how a story is delivered to the player and how a story will interact with the player. So they're the person that brings the world of the game to life. Any writer can throw a wall of pretty text at you. I've worked with writers and I've worked with narrative designers. The difference is noticeable. A writer generally will just give you a whole lot of text, but a good narrative designer, they'll make sure that you experience the story. And if you want some examples of that, there are games like Undertale, Doki Doki Literature Club, Spec Ops: The Line, Mass Effect. Those are all games that rely heavily on narrative design to kind of deepen those games. It's a fundamental part of their identity. And yeah, if you had a writer, things like this aspect of choice or kind of interacting with the aspects of how the game takes into account how you've played it, those things just wouldn't exist. So that's really where a narrative designer comes in and shines. So besides designers, I'm going to take a little bit of a sidestep and talk about some other roles that are worth mentioning because they're sort of in the design sphere. They aren't game designers per se, but they do either work very closely with them or they have very similar responsibilities or job descriptions. So UI and UX designers, how they handle how a game looks and feels. While these two roles usually end up focusing on the menus and HUDs, their job can extend through the entire game, especially for UX. So you might have heard these terms before, but and also they get used interchangeably, but there is a difference. So UI, user interface, is the one that most people know. That one's focused more on the appearance of things. So they handle things like color, fonts, visual effects, and the like. UX, however, that's user experience, and they focus on flow and feel. So they might be the ones responsible for what menu leads to where and how things behave when you interact with them. So like they might say, okay, you have a button in this corner, and when you click it, it brings you to this menu. All of those kind of interactions and how they feel, making sure that it kind of is intuitive, that's the UX designer's responsibility. So UI ends up being more of an art discipline, and UX is closer to design, but in the bigger studios, UX usually has their own department separate from design. So they're kind of treated like a separate entity, even though a lot of what they do kind of is basically design. And then in a smaller studio, they usually get put together. Sound design. So sound design is a lot like UX in that it's a design role in terms of what you're doing, but it is separated from the other designers. So some of you might think that a sound designer is the person that makes the music and sound effects of the game, but usually in a larger studio, you'll have a composer or a Foley artist to handle those things. Or if you're in a smaller studio, you're probably licensing music from outside. So what a sound designer's job is more about is how and when those sounds show up. So they're the ones who kind of figure out when a sound effect will happen, how it kind of comes into play. And if you're looking for a good example of this, one of the best ones that I can think of in recent memory is Nier Automata. So I'm not sure if any of you have played this, but in Nier, there's a hacking minigame. And basically, as you're playing, whenever you go into hacking mode, the music for the boss fight or whatever fight music is playing will transition into this 8-bit version of whatever is playing, and it will do this kind of seamless transition to it and from it as you enter and exit the hacking game. There's some super cool tech that makes that happen. It's not just like turn off one channel and turn on another. But that kind of tech, that's the sort of thing that a sound designer might be involved in kind of coming up with. So that's like the best example I could think of in recent memory of something really cool that a sound designer has done. But as always, they're pretty critical. Like they're the reason when you have a game and you punch someone that you hear the sound of a punch and that it happens at the right moment. If you've made a game yourself, you might realize that that's actually a lot harder to do than you first think. I've definitely had to do it a couple times, and it can be a real pain sometimes. So respect for your sound designers. Lead designer. So lead designer is kind of a weird title. It's not really a type of designer in and of itself. For the questions, I'd say save them for after the meeting, just because otherwise I might kind of get lost track, and I don't want to. Yeah, I'm already about half an hour in. It's a long presentation, so yeah, save them for the end, but feel free to write them. I think there's a question and answer thing. But otherwise, just keep them in mind or write them down somewhere, and I'll be sure to answer all of them at the end. All right, so where was I? Yeah. So yeah, lead designers, they're more like an indication of seniority or authority for a designer. So in other words, a lead designer is usually the designer on a team with the most experience, and they'll kind of oversee the other designers to make sure that their work is good or that it fits together with the work of other designers on the team. So depending on the project, they can either be more like a manager, or sometimes they're more like the person that they're the person that kind of presents the group project on behalf of the rest of the team. So if you've done a group project and then there's like that one person who comes up front and asks or presents everything, that's kind of what a lead designer ends up being like in some cases. Product managers and what they're sometimes called producers, depending on the studio. They're the people that handle most of the resources on the team. So I use this example from film. Oftentimes producers, they're considered the money guy. In game design, or in game development, I should say, that's pretty much also true, but it goes a bit further than that. So they're the people that make the budgets, they make the task lists and schedules. They're the ones who figure out who the team needs to talk to get things done. They're the ones who plan meetings. So as you can imagine, it's very much a managerial role, but they do work hand in hand with designers to push ideas and make sure that the team has everything they need to actually turn those ideas into the game. I end up having to work a lot with the producer on my team because, yeah, frankly, I'm coming up with the ideas. They're the one trying to make sure that I have everything I need to make that idea a reality. And a lot of their process ends up being very similar to how a game designer works. They just think about the people in the process instead of the product. Product owners. So they're the people who are a step above designers when it comes to the hierarchy of decision making for a game. So you usually have several of them on a game, especially in the bigger studios. And it's a title that kind of goes on top of some of the other leadership roles. So creative directors, lead designers, heads of departments, and in some cases, even the studio head can all be product owners. They're the ones that will usually be the ones, or that will usually define the problem that the designer must offer solutions for. So if you remember when I said like those examples of problems that the designer needs to solve, they're the ones who will give you those problems. And they usually also end up being the people who are the judge as to whether or not the designer is on the right track with their solutions. They are the council that will decide your fate. So in other words, as a designer, product owners are the people you need to convince that your designs are worth actually building. This can get extra fun if you have multiple product owners that represent different interests. And if you have to find something that kind of satisfies all of them, it can become a messy game of politics. So this is something I've experienced quite a few times where, say, you'll have, okay, there's the UX lead, there's the design lead, and there's the monetization lead that are all there because of this feature. And you present something, and the monetization person doesn't want it to be too out there. They want something more conservative because they know that that will make money. And the designer lead is like, no, we want something that's really out there. And the UX lead is concerned about, okay, but we want to make sure that it can be read properly. And making all three of them happy at the same time is that's a challenge, and one that even I stumble with regularly, even recently. Technical writer. So last but not least, these are the people who will keep your project's documentation up to date, especially when the designers aren't doing it themselves, which I'm a bit ashamed to say is often, because there's a lot of designers out there who hate writing their own documentation, even if they should be doing it. So usually what this means is they have to talk to designers and programmers to get all the details on how basically absolutely everything in the game works. And then they have to write it all down somewhere so that everyone else can read and understand it. So they're pretty much the people that make the user guides and instruction manuals for the devs. By the way, if you're wondering where all of that ends up getting stored, in the big studios, that usually goes to internal sites that basically function like wikis. So if you've seen Wikipedia, just imagine that, but a private version, and it's specifically for a game. Confluence is the one that gets most commonly used for documentation in the studios that I've worked at, for example. So technical writing, just based on that kind of description I gave, it actually involves a lot of the same responsibilities that a game designer has. The only real difference is that they pretty much only listen and record, but they don't present any ideas themselves. So I actually think it's a great job to start with if you want a taste of what the more technical aspects of game design are kind of like, right up there with being a game tester. So tech writers are, fun fact, they're also usually the people that are the most knowledgeable about how a game works. Because turns out when your job is to collect and explain information about a subject, you get a pretty good grasp of it. And before I actually went into games, I did a co-op for BlackBerry ages ago, and I was a technical writer for them. And my job was basically going to programmers, figuring out how their stuff works, and then kind of writing all of that down to explain it to other people. And yeah, by the end of it, I could probably make better apps than most people for it, just because I had to write all that documentation. So yeah, it's really good for if you just want to absorb knowledge. It's a good place to start. All right, so that was a lot of different roles, and as you might have noticed, they cover a lot of different aspects of making a game. But there are some things that all game designers do have in common. So if you're interested in game design in general, but either you don't know which thing you want to specialize in, or you just want to know where to start, here's kind of my list of the most important stuff that every designer should be able to do. Brainstorming. So you're going to have to come up with a whole lot of different ideas. Simple as that. Goal orientation. Having all of those ideas is great, but you have to make sure that those ideas actually satisfy the objectives you're trying to achieve. Extrapolation. That means fleshing out an idea. So you might have thought of something that sounds cool, but then you have to kind of go forward with it. Okay, how would it actually work? Scoping, and this one I cannot say often enough, but you have to be realistic about what you can do with the time and resources you have. Many games fail simply because they're too ambitious, or they fail because they're not ambitious enough. That can also happen. Organization. Oh, and one last thing about scoping. Game jams are a fantastic way to practice your skills with scoping because if you're doing something in 2 days, you have to be really attentive as to how much is and isn't in there. Because, yeah, you're not going to have enough time to do everything you want to. So great way to practice. That's my recommendation. So organization. At some point, all of your thoughts, they might be fine in like some big messy pile, but you're going to have to put them in a way that makes sense for other people. And that can take some serious organization skills, which leads right into documentation. So as a designer, you're probably going to end up spending more time in Word, Excel, and PowerPoint than you ever will in the game engine, unless maybe if you're a technical designer. Yeah, that's just kind of a reality of the job. So you need to be pretty comfortable with writing documents. Rating data. So these days, pretty much every game has analytics. The bigger studios will have an entire department dedicated to collecting and digging into these analytics. But a big part of the game designer's job is to read all of those graphs and tables and have some notion of what they actually mean. So if you have a statistics class, don't skip it. It's very useful for that. And that's probably like the one math class where I would say, yeah, that's one that you definitely need to keep in mind. Explaining. So all that pretty documentation that you were making earlier doesn't mean much if no one understands what you're actually trying to say. So you have to learn how to be coherent, and you need to know how to kind of explain things to other people, and people with different perspectives too. So like how you would present to a manager is not the same as how you would present to a programmer. Debating. At some point, your ideas are almost certainly going to get challenged. Someone's going to think, hey, that idea you have has a critical flaw, or it's stupid, or I'm not convinced that it's actually going to do the thing that you want. And you're going to have to figure out how to convince them. And that is going to be a lot of your job, is convincing people that your ideas are good. That said, you also do need to know when to take feedback in good faith and use it to improve your ideas. Sometimes someone will come in with a genuinely good point, and you kind of need to go, you know what, actually, yeah, let me go and address that. And then you tweak your thing to properly solve that problem. And communication. So basically an extension of all of those points is that you're going to be talking to people, and you're going to be talking to people from all sorts of different disciplines. So you're going to need to be able to listen and understand them and be able to get your point across to them. So that means learning the lingo, learning how people think. There's a lot of psychology involved. So fundamentally, designers need to know how to be social, whether you like it or not. Like, I'll admit, I'm pretty introverted. I'm pretty shy. I don't really like talking to people that I don't know if I can help it. But as a designer, I had to crush that real hard and just kind of get over it, because that's just part of the job. The nice thing is that is definitely something you can train and practice. So yeah, that's what I would say is kind of the core list of things that every designer needs to have kind of as a basic level. It's a lot of stuff, and pretty much all of it is soft skills. So that means skills that don't involve a specific program or a specific tool. So you can't really learn them from a textbook or instructional videos. You just kind of have to practice. You practice it, and with a bit of intuition as well, you kind of get it right after a while. So because designers are at the center of so much of the game design process, they're also expected to kind of have this aura of having a sense of control over everything. So to the outside perspective, we definitely try to at least look like we're these bastions of knowledge and certainty. Someone asks us a question, we need to be able to say, oh yes, it's this, or at least be able to give them a satisfying answer for the time being. In practice, though, it's kind of a mess, and more often than not, we're just going a little bit insane. It's a lot harder than it looks, and be warned, game design is not a job for the faint of heart. But the satisfaction you get when you actually see your work in the hands of players genuinely makes it all worth it. Speaking of going out of control, like I'm looking at the timer at the clock as I'm going through this, and I realize there's still a decent amount of stuff that I need to talk about. And in theory, yeah, this was a lot faster when I prepared it, but I kind of accounted for that, so I'm hoping it'll not go too long. But that's the kind of stuff where it's happening in the background. I'm definitely thinking about it as I'm talking, but I'm trying not to show it. All right, so the process. This is something I've been asked about a lot from people who haven't gotten into the industry yet. And it's kind of like this, what's the game design process like? Actually, I think when I first started talking to Leo here about what I would be presenting, this was one of the topics that kind of came up of what the game design process is. And my awkward answer was, well, there isn't really one. If you're looking for a step-by-step guide to making a game, there's no universal guide. So the design methods used to chain that people use, it changes from person to person, studio to studio, and it can be pretty different. So there are tools, tricks, and methodologies out there that can certainly be very useful. And if you do go to school for design, you'll learn about a lot of them. They kind of go through the full list of here's a bunch of different kind of ways you can structure your thoughts into coming up with things. Thank you. I've been practicing my meme game. Hopefully there are not too many boomer memes in there, but you'll see. My age will show. But yeah, at the end of the day, the best method to kind of figure out how to come up with a game, it's up to you and your team to figure out. You just kind of you find a process over time. You practice, you try different things, and you figure out, okay, yeah, this kind of works. Sometimes some team members or studios will require certain things from you. So like in a big studio, you might have to do a pitch or a creative brief or even a game design document, though you see far fewer game design documents these days just because those like kind of monolithic giant documents don't really fly as well in modern times, but there aren't really universal formats for any of these either. So in all of these cases, basically what matters is just that you figure out what the requirements are, what they're looking for, and then you try to include those things in your submission. How you get there, pretty much up to you, or maybe your immediate supervisor. Thank you very much. So yeah, actually, in that sense, game design, at least when it comes to creating documents or creating your submissions, it's very similar to doing school projects, except you're talking about making video games, so it's a little bit cooler. But yeah, I think back when I did school for game design, basically all we do is just we create a bunch of projects, which either end up being like kind of a proposal for a game or an actual game that we've built. And you just kind of do that over and over again, trying slightly different methods or slightly different contexts. And that's pretty much how we train to become game designers, is you just kind of go through that process enough times and you kind of figure out what works and what doesn't. And you sort of, not entirely wing it, but basically you just sort of figure it out from there. So when I say it's a soft process, it's a very soft process. There's a lot of fluidity there. That said, it would be a shame for me not to give you something to work off of. So I thought it'd be a cool idea to give you basically a rough outline of the overall game development process at a big studio and what a designer would be doing at each step, which I have done through the medium of cringy memes. So step one is pre-planning. The product owners give you a problem or a challenge, kind of like I mentioned before. Usually what it ends up being called is a mandate. And that's basically something like, hey, we want you to make a game for this audience, or we need you to design a feature to accomplish this goal. So for example, when I moved on to Siege, it was with the explicit purpose of I need to come up with a new design for a particular feature. That specific feature I can't tell you, but it was a particular feature that needs to do a couple specific things. So that's pre-planning. Then you get into brainstorming. So once you've got that mandate, you start coming up with a bunch of questions and ideas surrounding that mandate. So usually questions is the way to start. You kind of go with, okay, things like, what does the target audience like? How do other games solve this problem? How big should it be? Could we use this thing from this other feature? Wouldn't it be cool if it also did this other thing? And you just kind of collect as many of these sort of questions and ideas, and you just pile them on. Then eventually you need to start answering the questions from brainstorming and filtering those thoughts into something that starts resembling an actual design. So this is typically when you start talking to the people that will eventually need to help you build that design, and they sort of help you figure out if what you're thinking actually makes sense. So this is kind of like, I would be going to a programmer, hey, I have this idea. Would this actually work with the tools that we have? Would we be able to build this? And they might come back with, oh yeah, sure, we can build that. Or we could, but it'll take some time. We'll need these extra resources to kind of set it up. Or no, that's insane. What are you talking about? Get out of here. Come back with an idea that isn't stupid. The one thing to be careful with is at this point, you are researching. You're not trying to sell the idea just yet. This is something that a lot of kind of newer game designers, myself included, have fallen into, where we might start presenting something as an idea, and people will just kind of misunderstand what you're saying as not being speculative, or like, oh yeah, I'm thinking about this. I'm not like committed to anything. I'm just kind of bouncing an idea off. And they misunderstand that as being like, oh, this is your final design. Okay, so this is what we're doing. And if you don't make that clear, people get confused, and then you end up having some really awkward conversations where people think it's like, well, didn't you say it was going to be like this? No, I was just talking about an idea. I wasn't actually saying that that's seriously the thing that I'm proposing. We're not there yet. Yeah, it can bite you in the butt quite often if you aren't careful. That actually happened to me not that long ago, which is why it was at the forefront of my mind. But once you kind of get past that research, you need to get into the pitch. So you get all your info together, and this is where you can start being a bit more precise about what your design is and isn't, and why it's cool, and why it satisfies the mandate that you were given. So this is what we call the pitch phase. This is also when the documentation starts. So you might have written some things down before, but at this point you need to start formatting things in a way where you're going to be showing it to other people as like a serious thing. So this is when you need to start creating lots of PowerPoints or some charts or things that you use to illustrate your points. And general word of advice, pitches should always be short and to the point. So I know in school, regularly you have submissions and they have to be like these big, long reports. That's true in school. What you find out real quick when you get into the industry is that nobody wants to read a report for an idea, no matter how pretty you make it. You need to start learning how to be very concise about your points and kind of get to the meat of like, here's the important thing that you actually need to care about. Yeah. And I mean, that's useful in school too. Certainly if you want to get your like first line, needs to hit hard. The difference is with school, they want you to show the rest of your work, whereas in game development, that comes afterwards. You need to sell them first, then you get into the details after they say yes. Or for any job, really. That's true in like most industries. So once you start showing that pitch design to people as a fleshed out idea, this is kind of where the approval process comes in. So sometimes it's as simple as you do the first pitch, people say yes, boom, good, you go, you're solid. Other times you have like a whole bunch of gates. So a lot of studios will kind of have this formalized process. So at Gameloft and Ubisoft, we both have these kind of gates where it's like, okay, we need you to submit these specific points. So like first one might be just your basic idea. And if we like the basic idea, then we move on to the next one. And there we want to know a bit more about how it works, how it's set up. And then it kind of, you have a bunch of these that go a bit more into detail or focus on different aspects. And this is where basically you're presenting to the product owners, and then they give you feedback and they decide whether or not to approve and move on to the next step. Also, sometimes they'll say, we like it, but there are some things we think need to change. That's usually the case. And at that point, you need to go through iterations where you take their feedback, you go back, you tweak your design a little bit, you present it again. Here's the things I changed. Here's how I tried to make you happy. Does this do it for you? They're like, yes, or no, do it again. And that can take a good while. But eventually, once you get past that approval, you get to the prototype. So this is where you basically start building your bare bones or mini versions of the idea that you have to kind of test things out. That's especially true for the big ones where you don't want to just go directly into building it for the game. You might want to test, okay, well, we have this idea, but we're not sure about like these specific aspects of how you interact with it. So let's just put it in a prototype. So they might have like a couple programmers go to the side, make this little room, and then they kind of test out your feature. Um, you test it out a bit, and then you see, okay, does it work or not? If it does, okay, then we can start kind of building it up a bit more. If not, then you might end up going all the way back to brainstorming and trying again. But that's the first point where you kind of start seeing what it might actually look like as it goes. Then from this point, it's pretty much iteration. So the process is just the team building a bunch of bigger and more detailed versions of the design, while you kind of, as a designer, watch over it and make sure that everything makes sense. Sometimes you end up spotting flaws later on, and you have to figure out corrections. Like there might just be a facet that you totally didn't think about when you were coming up with the design, but then when you actually play it in an iteration, you see it and it's like, oh yeah, actually that's kind of garbage. Maybe we should have thought of that. Okay, let's think of a solution, tweak it, and then you come back. So all the while you're doing that, but then you also have to give your progress reports to the higher ups to make sure that they still believe in what you're doing. So it's this kind of back and forth of making sure that the team builds something that works, and then also making sure that it looks pretty enough that when you show it to the higher ups, they can look at it and think, okay, they're actually making progress, which can be very tricky because sometimes making something functional and making something presentable are two very different things. So you sort of have to balance that, and that takes a lot of understanding kind of how you're communicating to each side. Like if you're talking to the higher ups and they're very visual minded, you might want to make sure that whatever you show them has a nice pretty coating on it so that they don't look at it and think, oh, this is nothing, this is just a bunch of gray blocks. Well, yes, because we haven't reached the art process yet. So yeah, it's a whole balance, but that takes a lot of practice of just seeing how the people think and then sort of adjusting your approach to base it off of that. In some cases, you can actually go past the point of presenting to the product owners and you start presenting to the public. So that's where you start sending out prototypes to people, and that's what we end up calling early access, beta builds, and test servers. That's basically us prototyping, showing it to the public before it's completed to see, okay, what's their feedback? Is there something we should tweak? We basically want to see, does it work in the hands of players? Is there something we just didn't think about? And try to fix that before we actually ship it to everyone. Yeah, it's a relatively new concept, but it's been very helpful because testing with individual testers early on, that can also be very helpful, but sometimes it's not nearly the same as testing it in the hands of players. So that's why these days, being able to do that is something that we in game development have really latched onto because it's super useful to us. Especially because players just think in bizarre ways that we completely take us by surprise. It's super often that like we'll think, oh yes, this thing's ironclad. We'll give it to a player. They immediately do something we didn't expect, and we're there like, what? Okay, I guess we need to rethink that. Yeah. Fun fact: if you've seen the comment about Doom, does make me think of there are these videos that I've seen online of people showing speed runs to developers of their games, and I remember there was one for Doom 2016 where the guy is just breaking the map and putting all sorts of pathways, and the developers are just kind of sitting there like, oh, okay, I didn't know you could do that. Yeah, that's us very often. We see players do weird stuff, and we're just there like, what? So anyway, eventually you do end up with a completed game or feature, and then you can put it out. So this is super exciting, but also super stressful for us on the dev team because, yeah, players just do stuff that we don't expect. Every once in a while, it can be significant enough that features and games can actually straight up be recalled or killed at this stage. But if that happens, it's a big problem, and you start getting some big important people getting involved, and that's when firings start happening. So yeah, that's when the big controversies hit, and I can think of a few that happened in recent memory. Like one last year where yeah, a game got pulled back at the end. I'm not going to name it because I don't want to get in trouble by doing something like that, but I think some of you might know which one I'm thinking of. So ideally, that doesn't happen, and everything does go well, and you hit post-launch. So when the thing is launched for real, you start getting feedback. So that comes in the form of reviews, comments, but also data. And I'm not talking just about sales figures. So these days, in games, the concept of having data tracking is super common. So pretty much every game now will be able to track a lot of information about how people interact with the game. So we might know like how many times a player has done a specific action, how long it takes players on average to reach a level. So long as we have a way that we can measure something, we can use it to figure out what we might need to tweak in order to improve that aspect in a patch or an update. Yeah, I'll just say it was an RPG. But yeah, so when you start getting a lot of data, there's a lot of stuff you can start thinking about as a designer because there are several things where we sort of make assumptions of, okay, yeah, people will behave this way. And then we see from the numbers, oh, actually, 50% of players do this thing that we weren't expecting. And that's where a lot of the balancing or tweaks start coming in. And this step can be repeated pretty much as is necessary until either we're happy with what we've done, which never happens, or we've done everything we reasonably can, or just we get told, okay, time to move on to the next feature. These days, because live service is pretty much the standard, it's not unusual for a designer to work on a single feature over multiple years. But yeah, that's pretty much it. You basically repeat this until, well, the game's done, and then you start on a new game, and then the cycle begins anew. That is the life of a game designer. So that was the big important stuff. So now the juicy little extra bits for you guys. So I am quite fond of crushing expectations. So here's a few other things about game designers that I've definitely heard that people just get wrong all the time. The best way to become a game designer is to, so let me stop you right there. Back when I was a student, I spent a lot of time talking to designers and other people in the industry just to figure out what the best way to get in would be. And you know what I found out? Literally nobody takes the same path, least of all for game design. Some people got promoted from QA, that's testing departments. Some go to school. Other people do cool stuff like they create mods or give suggestions on Twitter, and then some other designer will notice, think, hey, that's a really cool thing, let's hire this guy. That happens. Some people just meet and talk to exactly the right people at exactly the right time. There's no wrong answer for how to get into game design. There are a lot of right answers, and some that are a bit iffy, but let's not get into that. All game designers have the same skills and background. It's kind of that old mentality that if you have X job, it means you do this, and pretty much everyone who has that job can do the same thing. Hopefully, I've kind of debunked this by this point with all my previous subjects. There are definitely some common elements, yes, but one of the things that I think is the coolest about game designers in particular is that we are so different. beyond just the types of designers. Every designer has their own approach to challenges that is uniquely theirs, and that's what allows us to create so many wildly different games. Like the way I'll think about a problem is completely different from how another designer will think about it, both in terms of what we'll draw from or our approach. Like I might be more conservative, and another guy I work with has like more kind of wacky out there ideas. And sometimes it's really cool to have multiple designers who have very different mindsets working together, because that can kind of complement it. Where, okay, I'll think of something, and then this other guy will think of something, and kind of between the two of us, we think of an idea that kind of takes the best elements of both. Um, all right, this one. Why didn't they think of? So, at some point or another, I'm sure all of you have thought, if they just did this one thing, the game would have been so much better. Or why didn't the game designers think of doing this thing? So here's the point about that. We probably already did, and there's probably a reason we haven't done it. So for those of you who, if any of you are the kind who like to go on Twitter and complain to the devs of like, oh, you guys are stupid, you didn't think of doing this thing. So usually the scenario plays out as one of these. Also, I'm not saying any of you do that, but there are people out there who do it, and we like to laugh at them. Not because they're always wrong, just sometimes. But yeah, more often than not, when you see a good idea posted somewhere and pretty much everyone agrees that it's a good idea, the situation inside the studio is one of the following. So could be that we also agree and we're already working on it. We have that solution, we're building it, just we aren't ready to show it yet because turns out making games can take a long time, especially if you're in AAA. Like the process, you'd think something as simple as like a basic change would be quick to do. No, the number of hoops you need to go through is kind of insane. And because of that, a lot of things that should be done quickly end up taking a long time. I'm not necessarily saying that's good, but it is kind of the reality of when you work on a big game, lots of people are involved, and that means everything goes slower. The other one is we agree, but there's some reason outside of our control that prevents us from doing it. So great example of that would be license restrictions. A lot of people who haven't gotten into the industry and experienced it firsthand don't realize just how much licensing can be a huge pain. There are a lot of things that we just aren't allowed to do because X company that is involved in the thing doesn't want us to do it. Like one of the games I worked on was a game that involved using licensed cars. And it's kind of crazy the stories you find out about specific things that car licensors are like, no, we want you to do this specific thing, or we don't want you to do this. And sometimes it can be something that just completely causes your feature idea to have to be thrown out a window because, well, this one company said no, and we can't go against them. Other times, it's just that we don't have the resources or tech to support it. There are a lot of ideas where the answer ends up being, that's cool. Yeah, we can't build that, though. We literally don't have the tech for it. I remember back before I got into the industry, I talked to a guy from Ubisoft back when Assassin's Creed Unity came out, and I kind of asked, hey, that whole Assassin's Creed Unity, when it came out, it was this huge debacle about how it had all of these tech issues and stuff. Why was it so buggy? And the answer basically came down to, yeah, we started using a new engine because we needed it to do a specific thing with the tech. And so we had to throw out all the old stuff and basically make the game from scratch. So it was actually a lot more complicated. And, well, as a result, we ended up with a lot of problems. That's not to say it was really an excuse, just you end up in a situation where something that looked a lot easier to people who only see the end product turned out to have been a lot more complicated. And sometimes it's just too complicated and they can't do it. I've had instances where we were working on something and then because the engine was X engine, we couldn't do something. So we just had to scrap ideas. Or sometimes it's something where it just doesn't work with another feature that we're working on. Like say, okay, this cool feature could do some stuff, but we're working on another feature that does a lot of the same things and we don't want to throw away that work. So we won't do this one, we'll do this other thing instead. basically, these are all examples of things that can block a design that the average player wouldn't be aware of because, well, we don't really tell you guys this stuff. That's not to say it's always the case. Sometimes there are genuinely cool ideas that come out and we didn't think of it, but it's rare. And then, if that's the case, why don't they just tell you about it? Things would be so much better if studios were transparent with their audiences. This one's a little tricky because, quite honestly, I largely agree with it. I do think that transparency between studios and players is something that is a net benefit, personally. That said, there are some pretty valid reasons for why a studio might not want to tell its developers, or might not want its developers telling the public things too openly. The tricky thing here is that designing games involves a lot of moving parts, and sometimes being too open about subjects can bite us in the butt later on. That's even more true in the case of big games with a lot of devoted fans. So if you're in a studio like Ubisoft where you're working on something where thousands of people are a fan of the game, you can get into a lot of trouble for revealing stuff too early. And sometimes the reasons for it are kind of difficult to understand without like really getting into nitty-gritty business stuff. But sometimes it's stuff like just talking about a feature before it's been approved will result in false expectations. That's a really common one. Like, I could tell you about the feature I'm working on right now and what I'm planning to present to the team about it and what I'm thinking, and I'd be really excited to. But if I did that, well, then you guys suddenly think, okay, this is potentially something that is going to show up in the game in the near future, and then that creates expectations. Which what happens then if I show it to the team and it turns out we don't go with that idea and we do something else? And then we show it and people are mad because it's not the thing that I quote unquote promised before. Sometimes it's something like exposing a detail about a partnership where that can end up hurting the studio and the partner company because, well, they just weren't prepared. And that can damage their relationships. If I were to like say I leak that we're having a tie-in thing with this company and that company wasn't prepared, and they get mad at me or they get mad at my studio because that thing got revealed and they just don't want to work with us anymore. That's definitely happened in the past. And sometimes it's as simple as developers just not really knowing how to talk to the public properly. So like designers, as a part of our job, we kind of have to talk to people, but even we screw up in terms of talking to the public. It's a very different thing than talking to like specific people in a specific job. So basically, there's a lot that can go wrong if we reveal too much and we aren't properly prepared for it. So usually what ends up happening is studios, especially the bigger ones that have a lot of extra kind of legal layers that they need to take into account, tend to be very careful about what we're allowed to say. So it's why most studios these days have people or even entire departments devoted to community management and developer communications. Like, for instance, to do this talk, I had to get a whole bunch of approvals from Ubisoft to say, okay, what's the subject matter that you're presenting? Are you going to be talking about anything specifically related to your game or what you're doing right now? They had to look through my slides, make sure I didn't reveal anything that would expose privileged content from either my job now or any of my previous jobs. So it's a lot of extra steps, and oftentimes what ends up happening is people who work in the studio don't really want to go through all that trouble, so they just end up not talking at all. And I mean, I can certainly understand it's a lot of hoops that we have to jump through. But in the end, it's all part of just making sure that we keep our information protected so that we don't end up giving you information that is incorrect or doing something that will damage the project further down the road. And it's honestly really hard. Like, not blurting out all those secrets is probably the single hardest part of my job, because there's a lot of stuff I'd be super excited to talk about. But I have to remember that doing so without caution can cause trouble for myself and my coworkers, and I don't want to mess with my coworkers. Some of them are bigger than me. So I hope that didn't bum you out too much, but that's one of the tough things about the industry is it is an industry, and as a result, we have certain obligations. But it's one of those things that I hear a lot of people complain about, and I've certainly thought about it a lot in the past. And then when you kind of get in, you start to see the other side, and it's a tricky situation. So maybe, just maybe, after all of that, I haven't scared you all off, and some of you are genuinely still interested in pursuing a career in game design. If that's the case, awesome. I'm super happy. And here's a few tips that I can give you that might help you on your way. Actually, most of these should probably help you regardless of what part of games you're looking to get into. And if you are interested, I do have a more detailed list. I don't go too much into it because, well, quite frankly, I don't think you guys are at that stage yet to seriously be looking at getting a job just yet. There's still some stages before that, but if you do, I do have one on my blog, and I'm more than happy to share it with you guys. So here's kind of the stuff that I think is still useful for you guys to know now. First tip, networking. The games industry is very small and very social. It might not look very small, but it surprisingly is once you're in there. People move around between studios super often. So a lot of us know at least a few people in various different studios. I think at this point, just from my experience, I know pretty much at least one person in almost every single studio in Montreal. That's not entirely true because there's a ton of studios in Montreal that are super tiny, but pretty much all of the big ones, I know at least one person working in them. And that's especially true for designers because we end up having to talk to a lot of different people on any project. So that whole aspect of where we move around ends up causing these really big networks to happen. And word travels fast. So building a good reputation with anyone in the industry can really help you to get places. Likewise, if you have a bad attitude or you do something kind of particularly terrible, you can get blacklisted just as quickly. So don't necessarily assume that you can act a fool at one studio and then leave it and then go to a different studio and expect that to kind of work. Because more often what will happen is someone will see, oh yeah, they worked at this studio. Hey, person that I know at that studio, what was this guy like? Oh, he was terrible. Don't hire him. Okay. That happens a lot. And we've had some cases of like people who got into the industry just because they had such a good reputation. Like I've definitely worked with people in the past where it's like, yeah, they're super great, and I ended up recruiting them. Or that's actually how I ended up at Ubisoft. Is one guy that I previously worked with went to Ubisoft, and then I kind of ended up like that. Yes, that's very true. Many jobs are like that. I mention it particularly in the case of games because as an industry, there's a lot of kind of internal discussion that it's a lot more casual than some other professional industries where there's like a bit more of a formal hierarchy thing going on. With games, there's a lot of people who just kind of meet up for drinks on a regular basis and chat it up. So a lot of this kind of information flows a bit more easily once you're in there. Like a lot of that stuff that I said of things that we don't tell the public, we tell to each other all the time. Like I'm sure there's a bunch of privileged information that's been leaked between studios, or at least between individuals. But usually we're smart enough to not leak the actual important stuff, or if we do, we know how to keep a lid on it. But that definitely does happen. So yeah, I wanted to highlight that because, yeah, it is true for most jobs, but especially true in games. Ask for guidance, not jobs. So a lot of people in the games industry are super passionate about their work, and they're totally willing to help you out on your way to getting into the industry, myself included. I'm super happy to help anyone get into this field if I can. That said, there is a question of coming at it the right way. So a lot of us do get approached by people kind of just asking for a job or a recommendation. I've certainly gotten quite a few of like, hey, can you recommend me to this company? I'm a person who does this. And the thing is, most of us aren't really cool with recommending someone we've never personally worked with. So you can show me your portfolio, and it's like, okay, that's cool. Yeah, I see you've done some cool stuff, but I've never worked with you. And as a result, I'm not really sure I want to recommend you because I don't know how you work. I don't know what kind of process was involved for getting those final results that are in your portfolio. So I can't tell, okay, did this guy like actually put in the work and do things really organized, or is his back end kind of a mess and he just has a bad attitude, but he doesn't show it in the interview. So if I've worked with you, I probably know those things and I'd be more ready to recommend you. But otherwise, it's tricky. So kind of bear that in mind. That's how most of us think. Uh, but what we are willing to do is give you tips on how to develop your skills further, or just kind of give you some insight on how things in the industry actually work. So a lot of the things when I was kind of trying to get in was just calling someone up and grabbing a coffee and just kind of asking, so like, hey, what's your day to day like? What kind of stuff do you do? What would you say are the useful things to know in your job, or stuff like that? Um, just kind of picking their brains a bit. And most of us, we really do like our jobs and we like talking about them. So uh, if you kind of get that information, um, and like it can be either coffee. Also, if you go to like industry events, go to the after parties, go to the after parties, and like find us when we're good and drunk and just chat us up. We will tell you a lot of secret weird stuff that happens in the industry that you wouldn't know about, and you can learn a lot of stuff that way. I've seen some strange things at after parties, some of which it occurs to me now I can't really say anymore because some of them involved Ubisoft before I was with them. But uh, ask me in private and I might tell you. But yeah, if you kind of go through that process and just sort of socialize, you might not get a referral, but you can get some useful knowledge that can definitely help you. And it can also make you put out this kind of good impression that can help you out later. Like if someone at an industry event has kind of met you a few times and they kind of get to know your face, and they just have a positive interaction with you, that might help you on later on, where like you'll go to the studio and you see that guy and it's like, hey, that guy, yeah, he's cool, hire him. That also happens. I've actually seen that happen at least once. It was and I literally got one offer to work at a place because I just did some karaoke with a guy once, and he really liked my AC/DC impression. It can literally be that weird. But yeah, just socialize and don't kind of go looking for a handout, because that immediately puts us on the defensive, and that kind of it closes a door that you don't want closed. Don't be too picky about your opportunities. So this is one that I have definitely seen from experience. Some of you might be thinking, like, back when I was saying the places I worked at, mobile games, ew. Or you might be thinking, I only want to work for a company that's made a game that I personally play. And I totally get it. Like when I said I was working on Siege, yeah, I brag about it like crazy because people actually knew the game I was working on, and that's a great feeling. Um, but here's the thing. So in the games industry, experience is everything. Even more than education, I'd say, at least as far as hiring goes. The thing that they care most about when it comes to actually deciding whether or not to hire a person is what experience do they have? What games have they made, or how many games have they made? What environments have they worked in? So just the fact of having worked on a game makes you a much more attractive hire to employers. So with that in mind, don't worry too much about your first couple jobs not being exactly the kind of thing you want to do. It's honestly extremely rare to get your dream job right off the bat. So instead, when it comes to those situations, take the opportunities that will kind of help you grow. So yeah, you should be kind of picky about which position. Make sure that whatever you're getting is still relevant to what you want to end up doing. So like, okay, if I want to be a game designer, maybe I shouldn't pick a job as like a programmer. That might be a bit left field, unless it's something where I can kind of inch my ideas in. But that's like testing is a good example where like depending on the environment, you might be able to kind of interact with designers and give them feedback that can demonstrate your kind of design know-how, things like that. That's why I said like technical writing is another one where you end up learning a lot and then you can kind of filter that in. But the point being, don't be too picky about the kind of stuff you want. Don't think like, okay, I don't want to work on anything aside from like the next Assassin's Creed, therefore I'm not going to accept any job offer that isn't that. Because yeah, that doesn't generally happen. So instead, take the opportunities that will help you grow and kind of build yourself up. And eventually, you'll see that opportunity that is actually what you want, and you'll get there, and you get to enjoy that high that you get from that. And just to give you an example of what I mean to show you that this isn't kind of common sense, or at least it's less common than you'd think. Back when I was at school, a lot of my classmates had this kind of mindset of they absolutely refused to work in the mobile games industry because they just wanted to work in AAA. That was a mindset I saw quite a few times. And me, on the other hand, I was a little less picky. So I started in mobile. Now, oddly enough, I work in AAA, and most of those people who were too picky just sadly never got their break. They ended up not working in the industry at all. So that's a very real thing that can happen if you don't kind of manage your expectations or go for the chances that you have in front of you. There's another way to kind of say it is don't let perfect be the enemy of good. So if you see something that's good, don't throw it away just because you're looking for perfect. Broaden your horizons. So yeah, the best designers are really the ones that have tried a lot of different things. So when I say that, just get as many experiences under your belt as possible. Play games you like, play games you hate. Do things that aren't video games. Read some books, go outside, learn some new skills, see different places, travel. The more things you can draw from, the bigger your designer's toolbox. There are things that I can think of because I've had this experience that someone else might not have had. And the bigger your toolbox, the more potential you have as a designer. Frankly, it's just do as much living as you can, because that just makes you a better designer. And another one that you may have heard from, if you've seen like any high tech motivational speaker, you've probably heard the line, fail early, fail often. It's pretty commonly used in high tech. And what they mean by that is that inevitably you're going to end up making a lot of mistakes or coming out with things that turn out to be junk. That's perfectly normal. That's really an important step as a game designer. The most important part of that, which I think is kind of lost in the basic sentence, but the key thing there is you need to learn from those experiences. You need to process what your mistakes were and kind of think about them in a constructive way to build from that. So figure out why you failed, what worked, what didn't, what can you do next time to solve the problem. The more of this you do, the better you'll do next time. And you just kind of keep doing that until you get a big enough kind of backlog of prior experiences of solutions that you've done and knowing which things worked and didn't, that you get better at solving your problems until you stop failing. So it's really not about the failure itself. It's about building yourself up from those failures. And frankly, I'd say that's not even just for game design. That's just life in general. Proceeds to fail. Yeah, that's that's it exactly. But as long as you learned why you failed, that's the important part. So with that in mind, I'll give you a bit of a closing quote. This is a bit of me being a self-indulgent. This is a quote I like to tell some of my coworkers. So you've probably all heard the definition of insanity is doing something over and over again and expecting different results. If you played Far Cry, I think that was 3. Yeah, you've probably heard that. But what I like to say is, what do you call it when you do something over and over again and you actually do get different results? That's game design. And with that, that's the end of my talk. So I hope it was helpful to you all and that you learned something. besides the fact that I'm into trash memes. Uh, Thank you all for listening, and thank you also to Curious for hosting this. It was super cool to see this initiative, and yeah, I really enjoyed doing this. Uh, so yeah, I have some information on this slide about how to reach me. I mean, I'm in the Discord group already, so you should be able to get me there. And I'd say Discord's the easiest place to reach me outside. Like, you can email me, but frankly, I'm slow with emails. And I've also got my website. I'll share all of that stuff. But yeah, we should have time for questions. And I mean, I'm here as long as I'm allowed to be here, because I've got nothing else to do tonight.
Yeah,
Thank
we
you
actually have
guys.
one question in the Q&A right now.
Yeah. All right. Let me open that up. Ah, yes. About networking. Which events would you recommend to attend to meet people? Um, so tricky because it really depends on where you are, but pretty much every city that has at least some degree of kind of game development in it will have some events going on. So I know for Montreal, there's MIGS. MIGS happens every year usually. Of course, pandemic situation has changed some of that a bit, but I see that next question, and that's a fun one. Yeah, pretty much every city will have several kind of events. It's you basically have to look them up. Uh, it's not too difficult. There are a lot of resources online for kind of the the game industry. So like you can see, of course, there's the big ones like you have GDC and PAX and stuff where like if you go to those are kind of a surefire way to find someone. Um, and then for the others, a good resource I found is the IGDA, the International Game Developers Association. They usually have a lot of kind of resources that will link you to other places that will also have resources, and you kind of just start going down a spiral of you kind of look it around. You look around and you find it. So yeah, IGDA would be one of my first recommendations to kind of look at. Otherwise, if you go to a school for game development, usually there will be someone there who knows a lot of the local resources. Like when I went to school in Ottawa, we had people who were connected to the industry here, and when I went to Montreal, one of my teachers was the guy in charge of La Guilde, which is one of the major kind of organizations in Quebec for kind of the indie game development scene. And through that, I ended up getting a lot of connections. So yeah, I don't have a specific answer. I would say, yeah, I think that's it. IGDA.org. Here, let me make sure that it's the right one. Yep, that's the one. Yeah, that's a really good resource. Otherwise, yeah, I can kind of think about that. I think I've got some resources that I put on my site. I think in my hiring thing. So I'll look at that and I'll link some of those. I guess I can put that in the Discord or something. I also plan on putting another post on my blog with my answers to some of these questions. So yeah, I'd say that. The one specific thing I'd say about networking is if ever you go to an event like that, yeah, talk to the people on the show floor, but the best kind of place to get the real networking done is go to the after party, and when you're there, try and like kind of cozy up to some people and just sort of listen, become a fly on the wall and listen to a bunch of conversations. And more often than not, at most of these events, there'll be someone or like a small group that will decide to go for the after party. So there's like the official after party for most events, and then there's going to be this other party that they kind of organize, and that's just going to be like a few kind of private people going somewhere else. But it's usually not so organized that like they'll prevent you from going. So if you kind of hear about it, you follow along, and that's the place where people kind of loosen up a lot, and they'll give you a lot of extra information that you won't see anywhere else. And I find that that's been the best place to kind of learn a lot of the deeper secrets about the industry. And you hear like a lot of it is drunk rambling, to be fair, but a lot of it can be quite insightful. Kind of you hear a lot of unfiltered opinions about stuff. So if you ever you can, the after party is the one to go to. Okay, next question. How much money do you earn doing this job? So when I started, the ballpark was around 35K, 35,000 was my salary. So that's quite low. But it was also I was there as like first time hire junior. So when you start out, it can be quite low. Then as you go up, you can go anywhere between kind of 50,000 and 80,000, depending largely on your level of experience. So kind of most of the time it ends up going kind of based on years. So the longer you're there, the higher your pay, more than necessarily if you worked on something particularly noteworthy. That said, the biggest kind of way to boost your salary as you kind of go through your career in games specifically is there's kind of this expectation that you will be jumping between companies. You aren't People who stay in one company for like decades is pretty rare, actually. What most of them end up expecting is you'll stay there for maybe 2 to 3 years, and then you'll probably move on to another company, and then you'll move on again after 2 to 3 more years, and you kind of bounce around. And each time you bounce around, when you kind of go into the hiring process, there'll usually be a decent leap in your salary. And you'll generally get quite a bit more from that than you would just working in the same place for an extended period of time. So I hope that kind of answers your question. But yeah, the ballpark is usually for a junior, it's between 30K and 50K. For an intermediate, so if you've been doing it for like 3 to 5 years, then maybe it's between 50 and 70. And once you start getting into the senior or lead designer positions, then you can get into as much as like 70 to 90, give or take. Usually they aren't paid quite as well as programmers or other more technical jobs. Unfortunately, yeah, it's not a job that you take for the money, shall we say. Okay, so for where to look up these events, yeah, I hope that kind of answered it. Yeah, I'd say if ever you go to school, that's the best resource. Usually someone there will know. Otherwise, Google Foo is your friend, really. I think there have been a few instances where I literally just kind of went onto Google and it's like Game Conference Montreal or Games Montreal, and then you just kind of see what shows up and you kind of dig around and eventually you find some useful stuff. It's not a super helpful process, but it gets there eventually. Okay, who is it that makes the ads / social media posts / banners, etc.? Do most companies hire freelance graphic designers or have someone in-house? It varies. So usually for the social media posts and banners, we have kind of dedicated people for that. Usually it's like the community managers might kind of do that on their side. Sometimes they might ask for help from like a graphic artist on the team. It's like, hey, could you do me a banner that looks like this? And usually, like if we have a few spare minutes, it's not generally a designer. Usually, it's an artist who does that. They'll make something. We do. I have sometimes seen instances of hiring like freelance people to do it. It's not as common just because normally you kind of want to represent what's going on in the game, and for that you kind of want to keep it in-house. So usually if you start getting a studio that's more than like 100 people, you'll have someone in-house who will do this stuff. Otherwise, if you're like smaller than that or an indie, then you might look at freelance in some cases. But generally, freelance isn't super common for that. Or if they do, they'll hire like an entire organization that is specialized in doing that rather than like a single freelance artist. So hope that answered the question. That's all the ones I see in there. Check the chat. Are there any more questions? I will take that as a no. So if that's the case, I hope you did find this useful in some way. And yeah, like Leo shared, I have the whole thing written out on my blog. I realized that there was a typo as I was presenting that I need to go and fix, but if I can find it again. But otherwise, yeah. Oh, the funniest brainstorming idea I've heard. I've heard some pretty weird ones. Trying to think what the strangest thing is that isn't like just a super nerdy technical thing that wouldn't actually be funny to anyone outside of the industry. I I remember at one point, this one, yeah, I guess this one kind of works. At one point, we were doing a thing back when I was a tech designer where we were trying to mimic some of the kind of structures for how like recipes for a crafting system worked from another game. We were trying to like deconstruct how that one worked and try to build something similar. So we were deconstructing it, and then as a result, when we were doing our kind of breakdown, we were using all of their terms, and their game was more kind of like a farming game, whereas our game was a car game. And then as we were going through, we altered the recipes and stuff to suit our needs. But then there was a point where we needed to kind of convert all of the names into our new tech stuff. So like, okay, this thing is clearly not wheat, so we can't call it wheat. We need to call it something car related. And as we were going through, we ended up with some pretty weird kind of transitions. And I remember one of my dev updates in the logs for one of the files was potatoes are now lube. And yeah, that was that was a weird update to put in, but yeah, it's not quite brainstorming ideas, but that was a weird thing that happened once. Yeah, usually like every once in a while you'll certainly like have brainstorming ideas where someone will say something completely out there and we kind of just laugh it off. But more often than not, it ends up being stuff like, oh yeah, what if we just didn't put a restriction on this thing and you could just get as many levels as you wanted to put in, and then the game economy and the systems designers both laugh because that's hilarious to them, because if you did that in a game it would make them cry. But it's not really all that funny when you're like not the person thinking about it. Like, oh yeah, I know exactly what would happen if you do that. You'd get players with like level 5 billion and 2. Yeah, and then the modders do it, and you start seeing either it completely proves your point, or you realize that, oh, actually that worked out better than we thought it would. Which that's always funny when we have an idea and it's like, oh man, that would be really cool, but also, yeah, we can't really do it because surely that wouldn't work. And then someone builds it, and then we see it work, and we're there like, huh, I guess we did. We could have, yeah. There have been more than a few instances where I've seen I told you so's of that type where like we do something, it's like, no way, we can't do that. And then either like a modder will do it or we see it in another game. That actually happened recently, and I can't get too close into the specifics, but basically we were talking about kind of, oh yeah, what if we do like, I had 3 different solutions for this one feature that we were trying to do. And as we were going through it, we looked at them and it's like, okay, well, option 3 is terrible, so let's like not do that at all. And then a couple months later, a very major game with a very recognizable name comes out and has pretty much exactly that proposal on it. And we just kind of sat there and looked at it. It's like, isn't that the proposal that we like immediately rejected? Huh. Okay. Well, that's kind of That's kind of weird. Sure. Uh, I wish I could specify, but the moment I said anything specific about that, you'd know exactly what it was if you looked into it. But yeah, that happens. And when it does, it's hilarious. Have I ever played games I've worked on with mods? Um, I can't say that I have, just because I haven't worked on that many games that I would say I had much of a modding community. Uh, oh, you're welcome. Um, yeah, like Hyperscape, to my knowledge, didn't really have any mods that I know of. Or maybe it did, but honestly, I didn't play Hyperscape all that much. I did when I was working on it, but uh, it wasn't quite my speed. I definitely play a lot of Siege, but I haven't played it with mods, and if there are mods, I'm not aware of them. But I just haven't really looked. Um, yeah, I mean, I've definitely played games with mods, and there are some great mods out there, but yeah, none that I've worked on, I don't think. Though I have seen instances of people doing demos of stuff where we think it's where they'll like do either some specific game mode and then we see it and we think, oh, that's actually really cool, and then we start seriously thinking about doing that in the game. I can't say any specific cases, but I can definitely say that that's happened in Siege, where I've seen some of my coworkers link a Twitter post and it's like, hey, you see what this guy like did in this like weird mock-up? That's super cool. We should do that. And then serious talks start happening about, oh, what if we actually did do that? It's cool to see when you can actually see it happen, and I can only imagine if that went through, how the person would feel. Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah, yeah. See, it's only 9:19 for me, so it's not that late. Yeah, take care. Thank you for coming.